So what do we make out of Harrison Butker's talk? I mean, he talks about the traditional Latin Mass. He calls out several things throughout his entire speech. He says we can't remain silent. He talks about the poor leadership in the nation and in our Catholic Church. He talks about successful colleges, especially those who are holding on to the traditions. And then he also gives us the answer to a lot of the problems that America is facing. And then he has a specific message for both the ladies and the gentlemen. And that is what I'm going to go into today. Welcome back to God.nod. My name is Casey, and today I'm going to be discussing Harrison Butker's commencement speech that he gave this past weekend at Benedictine College. And so how this is going to work, what I'm going to do is, he talks about several different things, and so I'm not going to talk about all of them because I think there are certain points in his speech that call for more voice. And so some of the things I'm going to touch on just slightly is the traditional Latin Mass, the things that he calls out, how we can't remain silent, and then the poor leadership. So I'm going to briefly talk about those, but then I'm going to spend the majority of my time on the topics of what does it mean for colleges to have success, and the colleges that are having success, why is that happening? And then the answer that he gives to the problems that America is facing, and then his message to both the ladies and then to the men. So that is what I'm going to spend the majority of this video going over. I will put in chapters, so if there's a specific topic that you have more interest in, that you can just go to the exact place that you want to listen to. First, we're going to hit the traditional Latin Mass piece. I know it's at the end of the speech, but we're going to hit it right now. And so he talks about how he attends the traditional Latin Mass, and he really encourages everyone to go to the traditional Latin Mass. Now, I think this is really funny, because the culture is reacting really wild about this piece. If you look at different videos that are being posted or different interviews that are happening, especially from mainstream Protestant churches or speakers, they're calling this a cult, and they're calling this just different things that is just totally not. They're making it sound like it's like this really secret thing that just came up when, if people just did a little bit of research of history, they would see that the traditional Latin Mass is from the earliest of centuries of how the Christians worshipped. And so that's just a side point. But I thought it was really beautiful because he talked about how by going to the traditional Latin Mass, it brought order in his life. And order is what, points us to God. Because behind every order, there's an orderer, which is God. And so I really liked how he talked about how we should prioritize our worship over parish life or the community, that our worship is first and foremost the priority that we should have. And I think many times as Catholics, we can tend to think that it's only about the homily, that it's only about the music, that it's only about these little things that really don't matter. What really matters is if we're truly entering into the Mass and worshiping, offering, entering into the passion with Christ and offering the Son to the Father with him. That is us worshiping. And so I really liked that point on that. But what I really liked, I keep saying that, but what I really liked is that he talked about how the God of the Old Testament, he was very particular in how he wanted to be worshipped. And why would that God be any different today? God came to earth. He humbled himself down, and he came as a man, Jesus Christ, and Jesus taught his disciples, his apostles, how he wanted to be worshipped, which was the Mass. He taught them to do the Mass. He initiated the priesthood that we have today at the Last Supper, and that's what we have today. And so there is something to it to be said that God taught us how to worship him, and we should not be telling God, "Oh, I don't like to worship you that way. I like to worship you in another way." We are nothing compared to God, and so we should approach God in the way of, okay, God, you taught us how to worship you, so at the very least, we should worship you the way you taught us to worship you. So I really liked that. And just a quote that he had from his speech, he says, "The cost of living must not be the only arbiter of your choices, for a life without God is not a life at all, and the cost of salvation is worth more than any career." So that was just a quote that he said. Basically, if you're, a recent grad and you're talking about, moving to a new city, that we should prioritize God and not just the cost of living, which I thought was really cool, because how often do we, make choices that are not based on God? The second thing I want to briefly go over are the different things that he calls out throughout his speech. He calls out abortion, IVF, surrogacy, euthanasia, and then he says, as well as a growing support for degenerate cultural values in media, and it all stems from the persuasiveness of disorder. So, a lot of heavy things there. And then he also mentions that there is nothing good about playing God with having children, and he talks about there's no such thing as Catholic birth control. And so a point there, so I think he's also kind of hinting towards natural family planning, but I want to talk about contraceptives because I think it's good that he kind of brought in this contraceptive topic, because too many Catholics use contraceptives, and it's an evil. It is an evil, because the marital bond, the marital embrace, whenever one man and one woman come together in the sexual embrace, they are saying, I give my entire life to you, I give my whole self to you, and then I receive all of you. And whenever you use contraception, you are telling that person, you are saying through your body, I give my entire self to you, except for the fact that you could be a father. That's what you're saying when you're using contraception, which is why it's an evil. It's not letting the act enter into fully of what it is, of a complete gift to the other. So I'm really glad that he did call out contraception in that space. He also called out moving in with your boyfriend or girlfriend, which, if you're interested in more of that, I just posted a video on that if you want to look at the link above here. And then he also talked about people leaving the church and abandoning God. So those are just a few things that he called out during his commencement speech. The next thing that I want to point out is he talks about how we cannot remain silent. Here's a quote that he says. He says, these are the sorts of things we are told in polite society to not bring up. The difficult and unpleasant things. But if we are going to be men and women for this time in history, we need to stop pretending that the Church of Nice is a winning proposition. We must always speak and act in charity, but never mistake charity for cowardice. Okay, I love this quote, mostly because he talks about the Church of Nice, and and this kind of hits on what I did my master's thesis on, which was basically the necessity of holiness for salvation. If you want to look into that, I'll also link that above. But this whole idea of moral therapeutic deism in our nation, of this, like, Christians today, we think that we just have to be nice and good to people and then we'll get to heaven, and that's not the case at all. And so I really like how he kind of calls out this, like, Church of Nice. Like, God does not call us to be nice. He calls us to be kind, but not nice. And the difference there is nice can be very much just forsaking truth and even forsaking charity in order to not offend someone. And that is where he's kind of getting at. And so I think that is super important. And it's very hard sometimes to have these conversations, really, even with family or friends or really anyone, let alone a huge audience. So, and I think he's right. If we're going to be men and women, if we're going to be Christians of this time, like, we have to stand for truth in this nation. That's very hard to speak out on some of these things. So that's just a little bit about that. And he also talks about how we can't remain silent because now we are becoming a minority in this country. He also says, our Catholic faith has always been countercultural. Our Lord, along with countless followers, were all put to death for their adherence to her teachings. The world around us says that we should keep our beliefs to ourselves whenever they go against the tyranny of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, this is what a lot of people also had a problem with, and I understand where they're coming from, but also he's trying to make a point that we have to speak truth and we can't be afraid of what might happen to us when we speak truth. And our Lord was crucified for the things that he said. He was crucified for the truth, proclaiming that he was the Son of God. So, Butker is just telling us, like, you know what? We have to follow our Lord. We cannot forsake truth in the name of nice, basically. And then next thing, the last thing I briefly want to cover is his point on poor leadership. He talks about President Biden, and he quotes this. He says, "Our own nation is led by a man who publicly and proudly proclaims his Catholic faith, but at the same time is delusional enough to make the sign of the cross during a pro-abortion rally. He has been so vocal in his support for the murder of innocent babies that I'm sure to many people it appears that you can be both Catholic and pro-choice." Whoa. I thought that was very powerful, and I think he just said it straight out of like, look, President Biden, we have to have respect for him. He is the president of our nation, but also he's trying to proudly proclaim his Catholic faith, but then also proudly support abortion. And those things are not compatible. The very basis of Catholic doctrine is profound respect for human dignity and human life, and that starts at conception. And so I really like how Harrison pointed out that we cannot be Catholic and pro-choice because they go against each other so hard. They're just completely opposite of what they both stand for. And so, yeah, I'm really glad he brought that into the light, because many Catholics today think that, I can be, 25% Catholic, or I can be 50% Catholic. And it's like, no, to be Catholic means you are all in. To be Catholic means universal, which means, it is for everyone. Salvation is for everyone, but that means you have to accept all of what the Lord teaches us. We are not a church that says like, oh yeah, just do the bare minimum and then like maybe you'll get to heaven. Like, we are not a church that says, oh, just accept the Lord as your savior and then that's it. You don't have to do anything else. Then like you got your ticket to heaven, then you're done. No, we are a church that says the Lord asks us to perfection. He calls us to perfection, and he constantly calls us to grow in holiness. We are a church that God calls, and as 1 Corinthians says, he transforms us like grace upon grace. Grace upon grace, he's building us up and transforming us into the image of him himself. So there's that. Okay, this is another quote. He says, "And he is not alone. From the man behind the COVID lockdowns to the people pushing dangerous gender ideologies onto the youth of America, they all have a glaring thing in common. They are Catholic. This is an important reminder that being Catholic alone doesn't cut it." So I think this is also good because it calls to mind that being Catholic by name or being baptized as a Catholic does not necessarily mean that you can use the name Catholic and say all of these different things that go contrary to the church and contrary to the doctrine of the church. So I thought that was really powerful. And then he also talked about how, basically our priests and our bishops need to step up. They need to prioritize their leadership over their hobbies. And he quotes Taylor Swift saying, "Familiarity breeds contempt, meaning our priests cannot imitate the lay people." And what he wants to see from priests, what we want to see from priests, is understanding justice, really the virtues, a life of priestly work, good manners. And he talks about how we've had poor models, but then we've also had amazing models. We've had saints. And the answer, basically, he boils it all down, that the answer to all of this, all of the things going on in our nation right now, is for all of us to follow God's will in our life, for all of us to seek the vocation that God is calling us to and to lean into it, to enter into our vocation. And so he called for all the bishops to be more vocal and to stand for the true teachings of the church rather than giving into their preference or out of fear. And we just all need to look at our vocation. Where is God calling me to? Is he calling me to a single life? Is he calling me to a consecrated religious life? Is he calling me to a nun or the priesthood, or is he calling me to marriage? And if he's calling me to any of those, I should lean in and I should press in on that and give myself fully to God in that vocation. Okay, so now we're going to enter the part of the video where we're going to dive a little bit deeper into some of these topics. So next up is when he talks about Benedictine College itself and the success that it's had. And so I just want to point out here, if you look across the nation, Catholic colleges, liberal art colleges, they are going under, they are closing. There are many dropping their religious studies, their theology majors, their philosophy majors. They're dropping major components of what it means to be a liberal arts college. They're dropping these majors, they're dropping these professors, and the reason why is because students aren't coming to those universities. Why? It's because these colleges have not focused they've lost their focus. They have completely let the culture come in, let the faith of these colleges be watered down, and that's why they're not succeeding. And Harrison calls this out. He says, we need beacons of light like Benedictine College to show the world that when you have Christ as your center as a college, success follows, worldly and spiritual, which I thought was cool. And he says, Benedictine is a reminder to us all that when you embrace tradition, success follows. And he also talks about, he mentioned the Associated Press article that recently was released in the last couple month or two, that media source, Associated Press, they came to Benedictine, they interviewed some people. If you actually look on their video, they have me at Mass. There's in their main video, there's like a video of me worshiping at Mass. So that's kind of funny. But basically, the Associated Press tried to show Benedictine in a not great light, basically saying, like, look how traditional they are. Look at where these students are going. And Harrison talks about this. He says, I am certain the reporters of the AP could not have imagined that their attempt to rebuke and embarrass places and people like those here at Benedictine wouldn't be met with anger, but instead met with excitement and pride. Okay. So he says that because, it seems like the AP article was meant to kind of embarrass Benedictine in a little bit, but then he's saying that, like, actually this was good for Benedictine because it's showing that Benedictine doesn't give in to the culture. It doesn't give in to people wanting it to become watered down. So that's kind of like what he's getting at. But then he goes on to say this. He says, not the deadly sin sort of pride that has an entire month dedicated to it, but the true God-centered pride that is cooperating with the Holy Ghost to glorify him. Regarding that article, now shared all over the world, we see that in the complete surrender of self and a turning towards Christ, you will find happiness. Right here in a little town in Kansas, we find many inspiring lay people using their talents. Okay, obviously that comment about basically the whole month dedicated to Pride Month has also started a lot of attention. And he tries to differentiate the pride that he's talking about that Benedictine should have for having success, for sticking to Christ when it's hard, that pride is different than the pride that's celebrating in June. And he's just differentiating those two things because many people put them together and they think that, it's good to be proud. But he's saying that actually there is a sin of pride, and he's basically just saying that he's not calling Benedictine sinful, basically. So that is that. And so my thoughts on this is that the Catholic colleges that aren't thriving, that aren't having success, he's right. It's because they have lost their way with Christ, that they are not focusing on Christ, that the majority of their professors aren't Catholic. And whenever that happens, or their staff, you start to lose sight of what does it mean to be Catholic, what does it mean to have a Catholic university, and then different things start coming in, and it no longer becomes a Catholic university. And then if you have a Catholic university that's no longer Catholic, it might be just Catholic in name only, why would anyone want to go there? Because there's nothing Catholic about it when it gets to a certain level. And so there's no point in paying all this money to come to this private liberal arts school that is no longer what it originally was. So that's basically my thoughts, is like, yeah, he's right. If those Catholic colleges want success, if they want students to come to their college, they need to go back to the tradition, to back when those Catholic colleges started, and hold on to why they started in the first place, was to be a place of truth, to actually take real philosophy classes and real theology classes. Okay, I'll stop there. That's my rant there. Okay, so he then goes on to basically give us the answer. So he basically, in his talk, he talks about all of these problems in the nation, but then he gives us the answer of what he believes, that if we all just did this one thing, life would be better. And this is what he says. He says, but this does make me reflect on staying in my lane and focusing on my own vocation and how I can be a better father and husband and live in the world, but not of it. Okay, first off, people keep saying that he didn't talk anything about fatherhood or whatnot. He literally just said that his main priority is to be a good father and a good husband. Okay, so I don't know what else to tell you, but like he talked about being a good father and a good husband. And he says, focusing on my vocation while praying and fasting for these men will do more for the church than me complaining about her leaders. So there he's just, that was when he was talking about the bishops. So he's literally saying that, what he can do best is to focus on his own vocation as a father and as a husband. And that will do far more than anything else for the nation. And then he said, we must be intentional with our focus on our state in life and our own vocation. And for most of us, that's as married men and women. Okay. People are very offended that he keeps talking about marriage and the family life. And if you don't get married, then you don't have a life, yada, yada, yada. That's not what he said, first of all. But second off, he said it quite clear that, some of us are going to be called to be priests. Some of us are going to be called to be nuns or sisters. And some of us will be called to the single life. But for the majority of you will get married. And so he's trying to speak to the majority here. And that's when he says, being locked in with your vocation and staying in your lane is going to be the surest way for you to find true happiness and peace in this life. So he did not say, the only way for you to be happy is to get married and to be a homemaker. That's not what he said. He said to find your vocation and to lean into it. That's what he's saying. That is the key to happiness. And it's true. That's what the church teaches. The Lord has a vocation of holiness and of love for you, but then God also has a vocation in the church. That's why I said she. The church is a she. Within the church of either consecrated, single, or married. So then he says, it is essential that we focus on our own state in life, whether that be as a layperson, a priest, or religious. Ladies and gentlemen of the class of 2024, you are sitting at the edge of the rest of your lives. Each of you has the potential to leave a legacy that transcends yourselves in this era of human existence. In the small ways, by living out your vocation, you will ensure that God's church continues and the world is enlightened by your example. So again, he's just encouraging, if you want to leave a legacy, if you want to live a life that truly matters, find your vocation and lean into it. Okay. And then he ends that kind of section of, what you must remember is that life is about doing the small things well, setting yourself up for success, and surrounding yourself with people who continually push you to be the best version of yourself. Great. Okay. Now, let's get into the biggest issue that people are having with this talk is his message to the women. First off, the biggest backlash that he is getting is because he's saying these things to women, but people are like, you can't say that, you're a dude, you're a man, you don't have no right to say those things. So I'm saying, I'm going to look at this as a woman and speak on it. So apparently, because I'm a woman, I can know objective truth more about a woman than a man. Okay. This is what he says. He says, for the ladies present today, congratulations on an amazing accomplishment. You should be proud of all that you have achieved to this point in your young lives. I want to speak directly to you because I think it is you, the women, who have had the most diabolical lies told to you. Okay, it's true. If you don't believe this is true, I want to encourage you to read any of the books by Dr. Carrie Gress, especially her Anti-Mary Exposed, that talks about rescuing the culture from toxic femininity. She also has The End of Woman. If you are not convinced that women have been under attack, mostly spiritually too, those books I highly recommend for you to get a better understanding of the attack on women and our dignity from women, honestly. So, sure, yeah, we've had the most diabolical lies told to us. Okay, then he continues. How many of you are sitting here now about to cross the stage and are thinking about all the promotions and titles you're going to get in your career? Some of you may go on to lead successful careers in the world, but I would venture to guess that the majority of you are most excited about your marriage and the children you will bring into this world. Okay, I'm going to stop there. He did not say, do not work, don't get a job. He just said, some of you are going to be very successful in your careers, but I'm telling you right now, being a wife and mother is probably going to bring you more joy. And then not only that, he says, I bet the majority of you are most excited about marriage and children, which if I can, they are, the students at Benedictine, they are most excited about marriage and having children. Like, that's just, that it's a very true statement that Harrison made. So he wasn't, speaking out of context. He wasn't going off on a limb. Like, that is a very accurate for the students and the women at Benedictine College. Okay. There's that. Okay, I have my bachelor's and I have my master's, and yet I thought what he said there was completely true and completely valid. Like, as a woman, we have ingrained within our souls a desire for motherhood, and some of us don't end up getting married. Some of us are called to a higher vocation of religious life, but we still have in our feminine nature a desire to mother, whether that be spiritually or physically. And that's really all that he's pointing out, is that is more fulfilling than any title or any money or any career goal that we achieve. Okay, then he continues. I can tell you that my beautiful wife, Isabel, would be the first to say that her life truly started when she began living her vocation as a wife and as a mother. Okay. This also has been getting backlash, which I actually understand this one because, why it's getting some heat, because he says that, her life truly started when she entered her vocation, and from a Catholic standpoint, that's just not true. Obviously, life starts at conception and physically, but also, every moment of your life is ordained and, sacred to God. And so every moment is important. And so it's not just okay, once you get married, then you will start living your life. That's not the proper understanding of, the Catholic faith. However, I don't think he's meaning that. And I think you have to read it into context of what he's saying here. I think what he's trying to get at is that he's just really trying to show okay, his wife is a beautiful example and witness to these young women, that, nothing fulfills her like motherhood and being a wife does. And so I think that's really all he's trying to say. I don't think he meant it as in you don't have a life unless you're married. So he continues. I'm on the stage today and able to be the man I am because I have a wife who leans into her vocation. I'm beyond blessed with the many talents God has given me, but it cannot be overstated that all of my success is made possible because a girl I met in band class back in middle school would convert to the faith, become my wife, and embrace one of the most important titles of all, homemaker. Okay, now, this is another part that people are getting very mad about. I was there in person watching the speech, and I had tears in my eyes immediately when he was talking about his wife, because the way he was talking about his wife, you could tell he has so much love and honor and respect for his wife, and he literally attributes all of his success to her. He says he would not have all of the success he's had without her leaning into her vocation, and just it being so beautiful. And literally, if you watch the video, please watch the video. He literally tears up on stage talking about his wife. So the thing that bewilders me is that people are attacking him on this piece about woman, because he just showed on stage how much he loves his wife, how much he adores his wife, how much respect he has for her. And people are attacking this whole homemaker thing, and I just gotta say, I know the students at Benedictine, and they love that is the majority of all of their dreams, is that they just want to be homemakers. They just want to be stay-at-home moms. They just want to be stay-at-home wives, and they want to be homemakers. So for all of those who are hating on the speech about homemaking, you guys need to realize that he is a Catholic speaker, with a Catholic audience, with an audience of women who he knows that the majority of them want to be homemakers. And so he is able to get a little bit more blunt here because he knows his audience in front of him. So I think that's important. And it was amazing too, because in person, literally everyone started clapping immediately. If you watch the video, you'll see this. And it's funny because in the show notes it says 18 seconds, so I know that someone counted those claps out. But the applause lasted for 18 seconds, and I gotta say, like, being in that room, it was so powerful because you could just see the intensity of just that charity and of that love and of that truth that was coming through his words of, like, our culture tells us women that we will be happy if we chase our careers, if we abandon our vocation. But what he's saying is that his wife leaned into her vocation, and she is way more happier. She's way more fulfilled when she embraced her vocation as a mother and a wife, and as a homemaker. And I think everyone in that audience, we clapped for so long because it was such a beautiful witness of someone truly leaning into their vocation. It was just so beautiful. So beautiful. He continues, she is a primary educator to our children. She is the one who ensures I never let football or my business become a distraction from that of a husband and father. Again, he talks about his own role as husband and father. She is the person that knows me best at my core, and is through our marriage that, Lord willing, we will both attain salvation. I love this part here because he mentions that she ensures that football or business does not become a distraction from that of a husband and a father. And this is exactly what marriage is all about, is bringing each other to heaven. And if our vocation is the way and the channel in which God is calling us to salvation, calling us to grow in holiness, then he's just showing his vocation is at work. That, she is bringing him closer to God and he is bringing her to God. Just beautiful. We have Protestants talking about having problems with him saying we will both attain salvation. This does not mean that Catholics believe that we can earn our salvation. This has nothing to do with that. That just means that we have to put in the work. We cannot just say, I accept the Lord, and just go on willy-nilly with our life and not pay attention. The Lord is so clear. We have to work out our salvation in fear and trembling. What else does that mean? If we work out our salvation, that's just what he's saying. Attaining salvation. We're attaining salvation. And as Catholics, we don't believe we're once saved, always saved. We believe that once we're saved, we can lose our salvation. But as Catholics, we believe that we were saved at baptism, and we're continuing to be saved now, and that God willing, in the future, we'll continue to be saved. The saving process, it's throughout our life. It's not a one and done. Baptism does save us, and it's the start, but we have to endure till the end, like it says in scriptures. Okay, I'll stop there. That's my rant. Okay. Continuing on with his speech to women. I say all of this to you because I have seen it firsthand how much happier someone can be when they disregard the outside noise and move closer and closer to God's will in their life. Isabel's dream of having a career might not have come true, but if you asked her today if she has any regrets on her decision, she would laugh out loud without hesitation and say, heck no. Okay, this part he was very dramatic in. And, again, people have a problem with it, but I mean, I'm sure you can go and ask Isabel if that's valid. I mean, her husband, her husband knows her pretty well, and is really trying to display the witness of her, and I think that just the way he did it, how bold he did it, I think is why people are really upset. But again, he's pointing to the fact that the secret to happiness is to lean into our vocation, leaning into God's will, and we only know that through prayer. And that, we can have dreams and some of them might come true, but our ultimate dream is to be in heaven, and that comes with sacrifice. And all he is saying here is that sometimes we have to sacrifice things. Sometimes we have to sacrifice desires to attain our greater desires and to attain the greater goods like heaven. Okay. And then he says, I am hopeful that these words will be seen as those from a man not much older than you, who feels it is imperative that this class, this generation, and this time in our society must stop pretending that the things we see around us are normal. And I think that's good because sometimes, when we look around, we can desensitize ourselves to sin. We can desensitize ourselves to the things that are going on in our nation that are not okay. And we have to confront, we have to battle, we have to go to war in a certain sense of fighting for truth and fighting for true charity in a Christian nation. Okay, and now he gets into his speech to the gentleman. He says, "To the gentleman here today, part of what plagues our society is this lie that has been told to you that men are not necessary in the home or in our communities. As men, we set the tone of the culture, and when that is absent, disorder, dysfunction, and chaos set in. This absence of men in the home is what plays a large role in the violence we see all around the nation. Other countries do not have nearly the same absentee father rates as we find here in the US, and a correlation could be made in their drastically lower violence rates as well. Be unapologetic in your masculinity, fighting against the cultural emasculation of men. Do hard things. Never settle for what is easy. You might have a talent that you don't necessarily enjoy, but if it glorifies God, maybe you should lean into it that over something you might think that suits you better." Okay, so he has a piece for the men too. It's not like he's just talking to the women the whole time. He speaks to the women, and he speaks to the men, and he's basically telling the men, don't give up, don't give in to these crazy cultural lies. Be true men of faith, follow the Lord's will, lean into your vocation, be unapologetic in your masculinity, do hard things, encouragement. And then he says, focus on the home, be home, invest in your community. I think this is amazing. Yes, men need to hear this. Men are also super challenged to make money in their career, their idol, their God. And he's saying, no, make home your goal too. Okay, and now I'm just going to give a brief word on how he ends the speech. He says, "Never be afraid to profess the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, for this is the church that Jesus Christ established, through which we receive sanctifying grace." Bam. This is what many of our brothers and sisters in Christ do not understand, is that it is only through the sacraments of baptism, confession, confirmation, receiving the most holy Eucharist, that we receive sanctifying grace, and then entering our vocation of either marriage or religious or single, whatever a vocation is. That is how we receive sanctifying grace. And it's every time we go to Sunday worship or even daily mass, we are receiving sanctifying grace to become holy, as St. Paul says in 1 Corinthians, of literally being transformed into Christ with grace upon grace. Okay, that I just love that he mentioned that again. Okay. And then he says, I know that my message today had a little less fluff than is expected for these speeches, but I believe that this audience and this venue is the best place to speak openly and honestly about who we are and where we all want to go, which is heaven. And again, I think this is important to recognize. He is a Catholic speaker talking to a Catholic college, talking to a very specific group of Catholic students who are mostly conservative, who mostly want to be homemakers, who a lot of them studied theology and philosophy for their majors, and all of them, I wouldn't say all of them, the majority of them, they want to go to heaven, and putting God as priority is a priority in their life. Putting God first is a priority in their life. So that's very, this was not a speech to the whole world. This was a speech to Catholic students at a certain college. So it's very important to keep that in mind. And then he says, this is how he ends it. He says, "Make no mistake. You are entering into mission territory in a post-God world, but you were made for this." Reminds me of Esther. "And with God by your side and a constant striving for a virtue within your vocation, you too can be a saint. Christ is King, to the heights." Yeah, I loved how he ended that. First, ending it with, you're about to go out into mission territory, which is true. Benedictine can be a bubble at times. And now you're going to go out into the world and you're in mission territory, and let's go for it. Let's evangelize. Let's share the gospel. Let's bring people back to the Lord. Let's share the truth and charity. God is with you. Grow in virtue, and go after your vocation. And then he says, Christ is King, and to the heights. To the heights is a reference to blessed, actually, he's going to be made a saint soon. That's exciting. But, and next year. But to the heights is a phrase that Blessed Pier Giorgio Frassati would say, because he liked to climb mountains a lot, and he would take his friends and evangelize his friends while climbing mountains a lot. But he would always say, like, to the heights, like, we are gonna basically, it's just like, let's be as holy as we can, let's strive in as much holiness as we can, like, to the heights, let's go. So I loved how he ended that. So okay, we made it through. So that is a little bit of my thoughts from this whole speech. I would love to hear your comments, love to hear your thoughts, but I just thought it was very important for me as a woman with some background of education to speak up on this, because the amount of backlash and that Harrison Butker is getting because the fact that he's a man and he can't speak for women. But I'm like, you know what? I'm a woman and I have my master's, and I was there and I heard that speech and I felt so inspired, and I thought it was so beautiful, and it inspired me to want to lean into my vocation, and to give it all that I have and to follow God. And I thought it was very beautiful and very inspiring. And so I just want to say, as a woman, for all of those who are throwing the hate on him, that you need to understand that the audience that was there, and that it's true that God has a vocation for each of us, whether that's single, religious, or married, and that it's through that vocation that we will be most fulfilled, and that we should lean into that. So I hope this video has blessed you. I hope it's brought some light and some clarification in this mess, and maybe a way to respond to this. But I would love to hear your comments. Please subscribe, please like, and please share. I am praying for you, and God bless.